Grunting softly, the man sighs as he wakes up. He lifts his head and scratches his eyes, brushing some of his messy hair out of his face and looking around. The room was rather dark, meaning that he slept until near at the end of the afternoon. A good rest considering the short hours he was used to. He got up and sat at the foot of his bed, resting his elbows and legs and taking a single deep breath before standing up. Turning around, he walked to the freezer and grabbed a military ration, put it in the microwave as he walked into the bathroom. He turned on the sink tap and bent forward a little, splashed some water on his face and getting some of his hair wet. Then he stood up and looked at his face after drying off. There were black circles below his eyes, something he had gotten used to. The wet part of his hair sticking to his face, he really had to cut it short. A sigh escaped from his lips. Despite the hours of sleep, he still felt tired. And the more time he passed, the more it seems the tired feeling would never go away. In fact, it only seemed to make him even more tired. The microwave beeped, and soon he was out of the bathroom, putting those thoughts away. He grabbed his food and sat on the edge of his bed, letting his thoughts fly as he ate. The conversation with Claire flashed through his mind as he remained silent for a few moments. With his fork in his mouth, the day had come, perhaps a little earlier than he anticipated, or perhaps a little later. He didn't know anyone anymore. Devouring his food in a distant expression, he stood up and left now the empty military ration pack on the table. The agent turned around when his cell phone screen began to light up, and picked up the device on his bed. A single call from Hunk and a message from him, asking him to come down to the meeting room on the floor below. It didn't seem like a big deal, just a request to come downstairs. He doubted that it would be news about Wesker, not to mention he had a pretty good guess as to what it would be about. Sighing, he picked up his mask and left the room. After putting it on, Ghost left his room and ran his eyes around quickly, checking the corridor. There was no one there, and from the silence, he would say that either he was the only one on the floor, or whoever was nearby was asleep. Shaking his head, he turned and walked towards the elevator. The doors closed. He found himself silent in his thoughts. Claire's words had hit him. The idea that he had heart beneath that tactical vest always wore somewhat almost surreal moment. Ghost didn't have a heart, but Leon did, and that heart beat, the way it bothered him. He shook his head and put his hand on his forehead, feeling a little numb. His heart was beating in a way that he hadn't felt in a long time. And that was the thing, he felt it. Maybe it was not such a bad thing. Maybe there had been come a time where he just let it be. But at that point, he didn't know how to react to it, and a part of him was terrified of trying. He was afraid if he went soft now, he wouldn't be able to do what's necessary when the time came. Afraid that someone would attack him and hurt everything he loved. Above all, Ghost, the agent, was afraid of disappearing. The doors opened and he stepped out of the elevator, shaking his head and pushing those thoughts away. He moved down the empty corridor, his eyes scanning the darkness around the night through the windows. There was a lot of noise in the distance, like voices shouting. The horizon was clear even though it was the middle of the flashes of light. A riot, perhaps? There were a few other people there too. He recognized them. High-ranking members of TerraSave. He focused his eyes on Claire, who just nodded shyly at him, avoiding looking him in the eye for too long. Which was good because unlike his appearance, he felt a little nervous around her. "Ghost, I hope you've had a good rest," Chris said, looking over his shoulder. The agent approached, ignoring his stares that followed him. I think you know the ones next to me. Joseph Williams and Amanda Lopez, along with Claire, are in charge of TerraSave, he said, and they both nodded at him a little uncertainty. "Good to meet you, Ghost, right? Chris told you about you," Joseph said. Ghost grunted softly. "Well then, you don't have to be scared. You're not on my list. Relax," he said, noticing that they were a little embarrassed to be afraid of him, and his eyes focused on Hunk, who stared at him. "You disobeyed orders," Hunk said, his voice muffled by his mask, but his tone was still serious. "And I saved who I wanted to save," he said, crossing his arms. "And endangered more important things," Hunk replied, but then shrugged. "But I'm not going to judge you. If that's what you're thinking, I'm glad nothing bad happened, he said, and Ghost nodded, grateful that he wasn't going to continue on that subject. We called you here for a reason. I think you already know what it is, Hunk said, leaning forward slightly, typing something onto the laptop on the table. On the screen in front of him was Simons, doing exactly what he told him to do. Confessed everything, come out as a hero, for unmasking everything what was going on under the table. Ghost crossed his arms at the different windows appear on screen, showing everything. Contracts, photos, audio files. It was almost an hour and a half, where Simons appeared live at the end of the afternoon. The agent just continued with his arms crossed, grunting softly and letting out what sounded like a nasal laugh. He was better than I thought, he said, and Chris let out an angry laugh. So it really was you. Look at this birthday gift to me. But do you know the chaos has taken over the city, don't you? Chris asked, sounding not all that concerned about, more focused on grabbing some peanuts from the packet in his hand. Wait, did you do that? Amanda's eyes widened a little. The chaos just hadn't taken over the United States, but the entire world practically. Everyone is calling for these people's heads. Riots are breaking out. There's no one in the BSAA right now. Most of them are on the streets trying to contain the people. She explained, and Ghost walked with the calm steps near to a nearby chair. Good, he said, sitting down calmly, not looking at least a bit worried, anxious, nothing. Good? The people wanted to kill them, Amanda said, explaining more to the agent and shrugged in return. The ex-president and the vice president have done horrendous things. If the people managed to kill them, it would make my job easier, he said, and Amanda let out a defeat sigh, leaning on the table as she switched on the screen in front of her. I agree, but the city is in chaos. The whole country, in fact, and that's a problem, Chris said. It's not a problem, Ghost said. He turned his gaze to face Hunk. What about the photos? Hunk stared at them for a few moments in silence, until he let out what left a nasal laugh. I was just waiting for you to show up, so we can send the photos to the world now, but we don't have total control of the situation, Hunk said. Albert isn't dead yet. We don't have much power. It's not such a good idea, but it's possible. Aha, we have power, Ghost said, slowly pointing his arm towards Simons. Hunk didn't look, but the others followed them with their eyes, and no one could see in doubt of each of them. We've got Simons. Let him take control. Let him look like a hero. We'll use his resources and he'll keep control, with the excuse that he's doing everything to fight bioterrorism. To the people at National Security Advisor, we'll just be doing his job, Ghost explained, observing O'Brien somewhat with a courteous expression. You're thinking of using the richest man in the country. Do you think you'll succeed? Simons is a powerful man. Who's to say? For such a powerful man, his bones break easily, he interrupted O'Brien, looking at the bandages of Simons. He'll cooperate like every man. He also has a weakness, and he won't do anything harm to you, he said, leaning his torso slightly forward and resting on his legs. Alaya mentioned something similar, but we haven't made contact with him yet. You've talked to Simons and gave him orders, Hunk said. With a sigh, Ghost stood up from his chair. That's pretty crazy. I never thought it would come to a moment like this, but hell, it could work. Claire was the one who said it. Sitting on the chair, her legs crossed and her folder in her hands. With that in mind, apart from your team, the only people who know about this is us and Simons himself, Chris asked and said, his arms crossed in front of his chest. Exactly. I'm going to talk to our friend Simons as soon as I've finished. I'll give you the signal, Hunk, Ghost said, watching his partner nodded briefly. I'll call Alaya, and we'll resume our search for Wesker. We'll have this week to reorganize. The focus is now entirely on Albert, Hunk said, running his eyes around before heading towards the door. Well, I still have to finish the meeting thing, you know. No, Ghost, you can go if you like. We won't be long, Chris said. The agent stood up, waving to him just before leaving. Picking up his cell phone, he sent a message to his team, asking for Simons in contact. In a matter of minutes, he received the contact. After making sure no one was around, he popped his back against the wall and put his cell phone to his ear. In a matter of moments, he heard a voice on the other side. Who is it? Simon's voice asked, somewhat suspiciously. There was a noise in the background, but it was muffled. "Change of plans," he said, not needing to be close to the man who knew what that expression he had. Simons was scared, that's for sure. Nervous, anxious, he can only imagine. The good feeling he got from such imagining was the reasons Agent Ghost was afraid he would disappear. "You did well, Simons, very well. Now normally this would be the moment I would kill you. However, you might have a chance here," he said, and Simons swallowed some saliva, signaling for one of his men to wait after he entered his office. "What do you want me to do?" Simons asked. "Simple. Just do as we ask. We'll provide everything we seek, for planes, cars, helicopters, weapons. You'll do what we say. In return, as well as leaving your family alone, you'll pass yourself off as a hero to people," Ghost explained, crossing his arms. "You'll use the excuse that you're spending as an investment conjunction with the BSAA to eliminate bioterrorism. You'll be an honorable, fair man, just doing your job. You'll keep this chaos in order." Simons listened in silence, closing his eyes slightly, feeling a mixture of sensations. Relief, mainly. "What I'm offering is a chance, Simons. A chance to stay on the right side. That is something that, so far, you've only achieved. Don't let me down. Remember that we'll always be watching. My team will be in touch with you," he said. Shaking his head slightly, Simons breathed a sigh of relief. "I understand. What about the president?" Simons asked. Beneath his mask, Ghost arched a slightly confused eyebrow. "What about him? If President Graham is not smart, he wouldn't do anything to you," Ghost said. "No, that's not that. Graham is smart. He knows a lot. However, he wants to talk to you," Simons said. Ghost cocked his head to one side. "Well, that was a surprise. Did you show him my file?" Ghost asked. His dangerously cold voice sure sent shivers through Simon's body. "No, I didn't show him anything. He took it." "Fuck, he's the president. What can I do?" Simons retorted quickly, loosening the tie around his neck. "Did he say why?" "No, he just told me to let you know when I could. I don't think I need to say this, but he's in a mansion in Ellentown," Simons said, and Ghost lowered his head, letting out a soft sigh. Out of all things he could imagine, a face-to-face conversation with the president was not on the list. "Right, thanks, Simons. I hope we'll be good allies," Ghost said, ending the call. He put his phone down in his pocket and crossed his arms in front of his chest. It was a decision to use Simons instead of killing him. Considering the situation, it was the smartest option. At this point, he would say that Simons' money and power, his organization once again, had at least 80, maybe 90% of power it once had. With the incrimination of other politicians and powerful people, they could use and take some of their supplies and capital for themselves. Yes, the situation could be adventurous for them. If they played that game wisely, they would come just as powerful as before, maybe even more. He was making sure that Hunk was thinking the same thing. Now, with that under control, Albert was the main concern. They picked up 2 different signals, each with a different part of the world, one location of the East African continent and another in South America, more precisely in the Amazon. All they had to do was examine the clues, make sure where it was and act on it. They had to act more cautiously due to the lack of capital, but now it may be possible with the intense glint in her eyes. "Sorry, I wanted to ask you to give you an appointment," she said, pointing to the meeting room. "You'll remain anonymous, but we would appreciate it if you could give us an interview." Ghost looked at her for thoughtful moments, then grunted softly. "You could have taken the moment I gave you, or asked Walter for my files," he said, and she shrugged. "I wanted your authorization, as well as I did want something similar. I have a story, a lot of intention about a super agent. I just didn't publish it," she said, smiling mischievously as she saw him cross his arms. "I don't think I have anything more to add, but okay." Sighing slightly, he ran his eyes around. The man nodded next to the man next to him, who said something to his communicator, checking the corridor before entering the next room. Despite being a precious position, sometimes being the president was a bit tiring and irritating. It felt like the eyes were everywhere. Well, a small price to pay for one being the safest people in the country. President Graham grumbled quietly and tightened the tie around his neck when he saw the marshal approaching. "President Graham, I am glad we've reached to the agreement. We'll do anything we can to please you, the man said, and the smile that Graham suspected was fake. No, he knew it was fake. In all honesty, that was the formability for what just show, for having a very friendly relationship with the marshal. He knew that the man didn't like it as much as he did. There's no need for all this. I think you and I want this border problem resolved as soon as possible, Graham said. The marshal smiled slightly, nodding. Graham then nodded to the man behind him, who stepped to the side and made his way down to the corridor, accompanied by the marshal. Damn, these guys look like they keep track of everything on air before I breathe, Graham said, and the marshal laughed lightly. You're the president of Big Eagle, and I'm surprised that there isn't someone with toilet paper in one hand and a one arm up in your ass helping you clean up, Marshall joked. And the president snorted. Who says there isn't? The two laughed lightly, both focusing their eyes on the figures talking to each other in the large room. Your daughter has grown up, the marshal said, watching the girl talking to his wife, and the Graham smiled with a nod. Yes, and I thought yours was being with you. We're still meeting later tonight, right? The president asked, nodding to the marshal, who walked with them to the corridor, then circled the courtyard and leaned on the railing. Yes, it's still on. I just came to say we might be a bit late. Apparently Sophie was called away at the last minute. Something was wrong. She wanted me to say it's no big deal, but she might still be late, the marshal said, and the Graham nodded. No problem. Duty calls, the marshal nodded. Of course not for the rest of us. I have to finish my business for now. See you later, Big Eagle. If your nannies will let me, the marshal joked as he walked away, and Graham snorted again. Fuck off, he replied, laughing softly as he shook his head. Sighing again, Graham stepped away from the railing and walked calmly towards his office, glancing again for a few moments at his daughter, who was still talking to the marshal's wife. Sometimes he would found himself thinking about the weight that had fallen not only on his back, but on his daughter's. Being the president's daughter certainly attracted a lot of attention, and not all eyes looked like they were the kind eyes. Running his hand through his hair, he closed the door to his office. 5 steps was all he could take until he felt a shiver run down his spine. His skin crawled and found his eyes widened as he felt the air become heavier. So our great leader wants to talk to me, huh? He recognized the voice, and of course he would. The owner of that voice appeared in his dreams. Graham then turned around with his eyes focused on the intense blue ones that stared at him, his face uncovered, which was a great surprise. He admitted it, but the mask that still haunted him, and which was apparently haunted the whole world, was resting on his thigh. The agent was sitting on his sofa, near the corner of the wall, his face resting on his closed fist and his elbow resting on the arm of the sofa. Ghost, I didn't expect you so soon, Graham said, feeling increasingly distressed by the sight of him. Ironic that he, the President of the United States, was actually the one who made others feel distressed, or tense just by being there. Now he knew what it was like to be on the receiving end. The ancient stood up slowly and took a few steps closer. Graham swore that he could hear his heart beating so loudly in his chest. The sensation was like no other. For a few moments, brief moments, he could see what looked like a glimpse of death. It's an honor, Mr. President. To his surprise, the blonde-haired man only bowed slightly to him, as a sign of respect, as seemed more like a threat than anything. This took the president by surprise, who blinked and stammered a few times. No, I should say that. I realized that there were very few in front, and you made it out of that encounter alive, Graham said, waving his arm frantically. And there were even a few where had seen my face, Simon said, as you read my file, the agent said, and the Graham nodded. He wanted to shake off that fear he felt, the cold, agonizing feeling in his chest. He tried to act calmly, the way he would in a very important meeting. He turned and walked back to his desk, feeling the agent's penetrating gaze behind him. I hope you don't mind. Before getting up from his chair, I appreciate the whiskey. You have good taste. No problem, but speaking of which, what about Simon's? Ghost shrugged. He will still be the hero. Apparently by your side from now on. If he behaves, maybe, When this is all over, I'll let him live, he explained, and Graham stood up too. What about? Don't worry, my team will be in touch. They already know, Ghost said with a small smile, and Graham let out a nasal laugh. Of course they do. Your help changes a bit. I won't lie. It'll be easier. I was beginning to fear I would have to force you, Ghost said, and Graham laughed awkwardly. I'm glad it didn't come to that, he said. Just before Ghost could say anything, the office door opened. The two men focused their eyes on the figure entering the office, not surprised by the agent's presence. Oh, Dad, I thought your meeting was over. Sorry, the girl said, holding the door and stepping back to leave the room. Oh no, dear, it's all right. All this, he's just a friend. We haven't seen each other in a while and we're just catching up, Graham said quickly, and the girl focused her curious eyes on the agent. Baby Eagle, nice to meet you, Ghost said cordially, bowing slightly, holding out his hand as the girl approached. Yes, a pleasure, sir. She took his hand and glared at him. You could call me Kennedy, he smiled, courteously observing the girl's somewhat shy reactions. Well, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Kennedy. I'm Ashley Graham. She returned the smile, a little more comfortable, with a slightly rosy cheeks with a glint of interest in her gaze. He knew an interested woman when he saw one, courtesy of having scars on his face by a special kind of makeup. I hope I didn't interrupt, she said, alternating her gaze between the two of them. Not at all. Your father and I talked a lot. And I was just leaving, he said politely, looking at the president suggestively before turning and walking towards the door with a calm step. Really? What a shame. Well, I really hope to see you around more, Mr. Kennedy, Ashley said, putting on his best smile. Ghost turned around before leaving the office. We'll see, darling, he said, before closing the office door. Father and daughter stared at them for a few moments before the president sat down and let an audible sigh. Today was one of those days. Do you need anything, Ashley? The man asked, and the girl turned to him, blinking a few times. Well, first of all about your friends of ours. He seemed nice, Ashley said, with a small smile, and the president sighed again, running his hand through his hair and leaning his back in the chair. Great super agent with superhuman abilities, not only destroys bioterrorist organizations and kills superhuman creatures, but also steals the heart of young ladies. You have no idea.